Welcome to Auction Version 4, the event management software tool from Auction Systems. In this video, in the Data Entry for Names series, I will show you the first panel in the data entry form, the panel for the name itself. The Names data entry area can be found on the main Home Task ribbon. Click Data Entry and then click Names. This is the name panel for adding a new name. It is the first panel in the name entry form. To the right of these name entry fields is a list of possible matches. Matches are names that already exist in your data set that may match the person you are entering. And since you have not started typing in any of these fields, every name in your data set is a potential match. I like to start in the primary last name field, which is where you would enter the last name of the first person you want to list in this household if it's a household for a family. If this is a donor record for a company, the last name would be the last name of the contact person for the company. The reason I like to start with last name is that this list on the right will start filtering down to only people with the same last name. If you start with the first name of the primary and the name is something like Bob, you will not see a match if Bob was already in the data entered as Robert. If you see a real match, there's no need to enter any more of the person's name. Simply click on the match and choose Use Selected Name. Keeping an eye on this list when entering a new name will prevent you from entering duplicate or near duplicate names to the data. If there are no potential matches, the list will go away entirely and the main name entry form will expand to fill this space. Let's look at each one of these name entry fields, starting with Salutation. Salutation, also known as Honorifics, is a drop-down list populated with some standard choices like Mr., Mrs., Ms., and Miss, etc. This is not a required field, so if your event is not a formal one, you may want to choose None at the top of the drop-down list. If you do use salutations, since Auction is very flexible, if you don't want a salutation to print on a certain document or report, like a name tag, you can leave them off for that specific document or report. If you need to use a salutation that is not already in the drop-down list, click the plus sign to add it and it will be there for the future name entry too. After the first name and last name, which are really self-explanatory, there is a field for suffix. If your event is more formal, this is where you would enter junior or senior, or if this record is for a military person, the suffix could be the abbreviation for their branch of service like USN or USAF. Nickname is handy if the person's name is Charles or Judith, but they go by Chuck or Judy. You may want a mailing label to print out Mr. Charles Smith, but would like a name tag to pull from the nickname field if he has one, and so his name tag would say Chuck Smith. We will talk about documents in another video, but just to let you know, when formatting a document, you can tell Auction to give precedence to the nickname field, but if the nickname field is blank for any record, it will always pull from the first name field. Special Needs is a pull-down list that can be added to by clicking the plus button to the right. A typical special needs could be something like gluten allergy or needs wheelchair access. Special needs can be reported on. For example, you can give a report to your caterer or banquet host listing who has special needs and where they're sitting. Role is a text field and you can use it to track things like who is the MC or the auctioneer or the chairman, etc. This is not a good place to track whether someone is a committee member or board member or part of a specific group. These things are much easier to track and report on in other panels that will be discussed in later videos. If this name record is for a person or couple who will be attending your event, if you are going to be using bid numbers, you can give them one right here by either entering a bid number or by clicking Next Bid Number. And if you would like the secondary name in the record to have a separate bid number, you can click that too. But you don't have to give bid numbers in order to save the record, and you don't even have to assign bid numbers in the name entry screen. You can later go to Event Prep on the main Home Task ribbon and assign bid numbers to all your attendees, and Auction will autofill these fields for you. The Quick Check button is also for attendees. If you capture the bidder's credit card number in advance, you can click this button, or if you're using one of our partners' credit card systems that syncs with Auction, these buttons will be auto-clicked when a sync 1 occurs. If this button is dark, the words Quick Checkout will appear on this bidder's invoice, which means this bidder has already given you a credit card which you will charge for their purchases later. They can avoid going to the cashier at the end of the event and also go straight to item pickup. Do not click this button manually unless you have a secure way to capture their credit card and can charge it at a later time. Never save credit card information in auction. Anyone who happens to get a look at your project would also have access to credit card numbers if they are stored in auction. If this record is for a couple with the same last name and you click the couple button, auction will autofill the last name of the secondary person to match the primary's last name, even if you had already typed in a different last name for the secondary person. If you press individual, then auction will assume the secondary person has a different last name and it will remain blank until you type in the different last name. Whether the record is marked as a couple or an individual also has ramifications on documents and reports. Marking a record as a couple should only be used if the primary and secondary names in the record are an actual couple that not only have the same last name, but they really are a couple, like Bob and Sally Smith. But let's say this record is for a donor company and the contact people for the company are brother and sister or brother and brother with the same last name. Marking the record as a couple would result in some documents printing as Bob and Phil Smith or Bob and Jane Smith. In some cases this could be awkward, and if you used honorifics you could get Mr. and Mr. Bob Smith, which is really awkward. The two people may be a couple but have different last names. Mark them as individuals anyway because you want things to print out as Bob Smith and Sally Jones or Mr. Bob Smith and Ms. Sally Jones. And if you did enter an honorific like Mr. and Mrs. and listed the woman as the primary and her husband as the secondary, you would probably always want to mark them as individuals even if they had the same last name, because if marked as a couple, when using those honorifics on formal documents, you would get Mrs. and Mr. Jane Smith. If this household only has a primary name and no spouse, or if this is the name of an individual contact for a company, click individual and the secondary name would be blank. If this record is for a company, whether you know the contact person or not, you can enter the company name. If you do not know the name of the contact person at the company, if you enter the company name, you can still save the record even if the name fields above are blank. Once you have a company listed, you can decide whether you would like this record to fall in alphabetical order on any reports and lists by the name of the company, which is list by company, or alphabetical order by the first letter of the last name of the primary person in the record. If this is an invitee that will be attending the event and getting a bid number, even if there is a company name here, you probably want to list them as list by name. That way, when they check in, instead of being found in alphabetical order by their company name, they would be found in alphabetical order by their last name of the primary person in the record. In order to add this record to your list of household and company name records, you must at least enter a company name or a primary last name. Those are the only fields required to save a record. The subsequent panels in the name entry form will be discussed in the following videos, but subsequent data entry fields may not be enabled unless the record is first saved. There is a little Save button here in this panel, and there is also a Save button on the task ribbon above this panel. Both of these buttons do the same thing. There's also a Save and Add button on the task ribbon. Clicking that button will not only save this record, but will open a new blank entry form so you can add another name record to the project. Please see the remaining tutorials in this series for data entry for names. Thank you for joining us.